Hi, I'm NBA shooting coach Dave Love, and I've been working in the NBA for over 15 years, working along some of the best players and teams in the league, helping athletes all around the world improve their shooting. I've also been conducting research on biomechanics of shooting and am currently pursuing a master's in skill acquisition in sports. So I get to see this challenge from every angle: biomechanics, motor learning, and real world player performance. We're here to talk about something simple but often misunderstood: what it means to be a skilled shooter. Because when we misunderstand what skill is, we end up practicing and coaching towards the wrong goal. But when we understand what being skilled actually means, we coach more effectively and help players perform in more situations. Shooting exists in what I call the shooting sandbox. Picture a parent taking their child to the playground in the 1950s. In the playground are a whole bunch of things that can be dangerous to a small child, but there is also a sandbox, a square area filled with sand where at least theoretically this young child is safe. Outside the sandbox are rocks and sticks and broken glass and equipment the young child isn't safe to play on. Outside the sandbox is danger, but inside the sandbox, the child is relatively safe. If you're a parent, you'd place your child somewhere near the middle of the sandbox where they have room to move in every direction before anything bad happens, and the parent has time to react if they start to get too close to the edge. The parent wouldn't keep placing their child back in the exact center of the sandbox every time the child moved. That would defeat the purpose of the sandbox. It wouldn't be any fun for the child, and the parent wouldn't be able to relax. It would teach the child they aren't allowed to move. This is the only safe place for you. Any variation of this spot is wrong. In basketball, inside the sandbox are all the functional ways a player can shoot and have the ball go in consistently. Outside the sandbox are all the movement solutions or habits that don't work very well. So in our visuals today, the sandbox will be represented by a square. Outside the square is the stuff that we don't want, the shooting habits that don't work in games consistently. We represent one shot with a star. This is the preferred motor pattern of the player, the way they shoot the ball in a controlled environment, their shooting form or shooting habits. If perfect shooting form existed, we would think of it as the star positioned in exactly the middle of the sandbox, far away from the edges of the sandbox. Each shot a player takes, even in controlled environments, are slightly different from each other. The motor patterns or habits are different whether it's intentional or not. We're going to represent those small variations with a circle around the star. That circle represents both intrinsic and extrinsic variability. Now let's understand what this all means. If we were to represent a weak shooter in the sandbox, we would do so with a star towards the corner of the sandbox. Some of their circle is inside the sandbox where the habits work, but some of their variability spills outside the sandbox. That's where more of the misses happen. The habits or motor patterns work some of the time, but just as often they don't. And just to be clear, I'm vastly oversimplifying to make a point. I'm not trying to suggest that certain habits will always work or others never will. I'm just trying to illustrate that certain habits can help a player improve and others can help them struggle. A traditional coach might often respond to a player with bad habits by trying to teach the player perfect form and attempt to repeat that perfect form over and over again, assuming the combination of those two things will lead players to being able to perform better in games. The coach measures the sandbox, places the player right in the exact middle, and won't let them move. The intention is good from the coach, but the outcome is a player that performs well in practice or controlled environments, but struggles in games. Unfortunately, this traditional method leaves all the other functional space unexplored and under-practiced by the player. Being skilled isn't the ability to repeat one movement perfectly and then execute that movement in a dynamic game. Being skilled is the ability to solve a variety of different problems in a variety of different ways. The game changes, the movement changes, the defender changes, the situation changes. So does this mean that shooting form doesn't matter and players should just shoot however they want? Not at all. There is absolute value in being near the middle of the sandbox. And that value is that it gives players more room to adapt. Biomechanics matter, yes, but the goal isn't perfect shooting form and being able to repeat it like a robot. Players will never get the opportunity to repeat their habits in a game. The goal is functional habits and the skill to be able to adapt them when needed. Let's make the sandbox more literal and talk about a few different shooting habits, starting with the set point. Imagine a player with a low set point below their chin. It can work. This is a habit or motor pattern that is common with young players to compensate for a lack of strength, and young players can make shots. They are just rarely great shooters. This habit of a low set point puts them near the bottom of the sandbox, so some of their circle spills outside the sandbox into the dysfunctional area. It works in some situations, but not in others. If they have to adapt even lower, maybe to get more power, the ball might get blocked, or they won't be able to get arc, or they'll rely on two hands. These players do have room to adapt higher, but those habits are unfamiliar to them. They are rarely in that part of the sandbox for various reasons. Now the opposite extreme, a player that takes the ball way over their head. That can work sometimes too, but now the player is near the top of the sandbox, unable to adapt to an even higher set point because they're already at their maximum, and adapting lower feels uncomfortable and underpracticed. Too much of their circle spills over the edge into dysfunction, and not enough of the circle covers the lower part of the sandbox. The more functional solution sits between the two extremes. A set point over the nose, in a variety of different ways, gets the physics of the shot working for the player better. But more importantly, it allows the player room to adapt in functional ways to different game contexts. When they need a little bit more power, they can lower their set point slightly and still have a functional solution. And if there's a defender's hand in their face, they can adapt higher, and that works too. What we think of as a great set point balances physics and adaptability. Does it need to be exactly in the middle of the sandbox? No. Every player will have their own unique individual constraints that will shape their own unique place in the sandbox. Near the middle will help, but being able to adapt is the definition of skilled. We can visualize the sandbox with virtually any habit. An excessively wide stance will give players more stability, but limit power. So it's not that it's right or wrong, it just limits the players in one way. On the flip side, a narrow stance may be more powerful, but will sacrifice stability to get it. Which is the correct foot width? There isn't one. A skilled player will be able to adapt in different ways between those two extremes. Turning the body so the left foot is forward is something young players will do to add power. Having a significant right foot forward stance is another way. Are either wrong? No, they just aren't as adaptable in one direction. A player might need to bring the ball up the shooting hand side of the body or over on the guide hand side of the body, and both these habits can work. And they might even be the necessary movement for a specific situation, but they will also limit the player in different ways or different game situations. Or we can think about players' body postures. Leaning forward likely puts players closer to the edge of the sandbox, but could also be necessary in situations like an aggressive defender or when the shooter is moving backwards. Conversely, having shoulders over top of hips likely isn't the optimal body posture either, but might be necessary if a player is moving quickly forward. Are either of these body postures the preferred movement solutions players should be using at the free throw line or on open catch and shoot shots? No. But they also happen at times, and we need to expose players to exploring these solutions as well. Good shooting isn't repeating perfection. This has been proven by research on motor learning for the past 50 plus years. It's the midpoint between all of these extreme examples that gives us the most room to adapt. So how do coaches use this information? If a player is in the corner of the sandbox, we don't just accept that whatever they naturally do will also automatically be the best solution. We are still allowed to coach them towards more functional movement patterns. We help them move towards the middle of the sandbox by adding constraints to drills that will make certain parts of the shot feel less functional, so they have to explore different ways of doing this. For example, we can add a constraint that the player has to take their guide hand off the ball at the set point because this will force them to explore getting their shooting hand under the middle of the ball. This constraint nudges players towards the middle of the sandbox without explicitly teaching them exactly how it should be done. It allows them to find their own unique way of solving the problem. Then, as the star is finding a more functional place in the sandbox, we also stretch the circle outward. We layer in task complexity, game representativeness, and other constraints, so the player learns to explore variability in the same ways they'll need to in games. Said another way, we maintain appropriate amounts of challenge and game like practice while they explore closer to the middle of the sandbox and adjusting in game like ways when necessary. Having biomechanically perfect form, if there is such a thing, doesn't do the player any good if they can only execute it in perfect conditions. Perfect conditions never happen in games. So the true art of coaching isn't getting players to repeat a perfect shot over and over again, then expecting them to be able to figure out how to adjust those habits when the game comes along. The art of coaching is balancing nudging the star towards the middle of the sandbox while expanding the circle as much as possible so that players have the skills to adapt in a game. I came up with Sandbox Analogy when working to understand the science of skill acquisition with one of my mentors. Visualizing the sandbox helped me better understand what it meant for a player to be skilled and my role as a coach in their development. I hope it does the same for you. If you want more information, including 2 blogs written on the Sandbox Analogy, then you can visit CoachDaveLove.com. While you're there, sign up for my free shooting newsletter and make sure to follow me on social media at Coach Dave Love.